Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something you probably didn't expect. When you clicked on a relaxing sleep video, we're going to talk about bathrooms. Yeah, that's right. Ancient bathrooms, medieval bathrooms, smelly bathrooms, fancy ones, cold ones, and everything in between. You probably won't survive this, at least not without laughing at how weird humans have been when it comes to doing the most ordinary thing in the world. But don't worry, I promise to keep it calm, slow, and just boring enough to tuck you gently towards sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That's how you help me keep these nightly journeys going. And hey, while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing those little notes from around the world. Someone in Canada curling up with a blanket at midnight. Someone in India sneaking in a nap at 2 p.m. Someone in Australia winding down after a long day. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in a quiet, echoing space, and there's nothing modern around you. No tiled floor, no shiny chrome, no mirror with toothpaste stains. Instead, you're surrounded by rough stone walls and the faint smell of oil lamps. The world of bathrooms, long before flush handles and scented soaps, is strange, funny, and sometimes surprisingly advanced, and you're about to walk through it as though you're there. It's odd, isn't it? The bathroom is such a private part of life today, but in history it wasn't always that way. In fact, in some eras, bathrooms were almost like community centers, places to socialize, gossip, even make political deals. Imagine trying to close a business agreement while sitting on a stone bench with 10 other people doing their business right beside you. That's not exactly something you'd see in a modern office meeting. But back then it was just normal. And here's the strange part. While some ancient societies had shockingly advanced plumbing and sewage systems, others barely bothered with the concept of sanitation at all. You'll see how some people lived with flowing water beneath their cities, while others just emptied a pot out the nearest window and hoped nobody was walking underneath. Honestly, when you think about it, history is really just a long story of humans trying to figure out how to handle what happens after dinner. You wander deeper into this sleepy timeline, noticing how every culture had its own rituals around cleanliness. The Egyptians, for example, treated bathing almost like a spiritual practice, scrubbing with natron salts under the desert sun. The Greeks preferred rubbing olive oil on their skin and scraping it off with bronze tools. The Romans went absolutely over the top, with public bathhouses that felt like luxury resorts mixed with social clubs. And then after all that sophistication, Europe tumbled into the Middle Ages, when people went back to chamber pots and buckets. Progress is not always a straight line, especially when bathrooms are involved. But don't worry, we won't be sprinting through centuries tonight. Instead, we'll stroll slowly, pausing in each time and place, letting you picture it clearly before moving on. The goal isn't to overwhelm you with details. It's to drift through them like walking down a quiet hallway, each door leading to a slightly stranger, slightly smellier story. And there are debates here too, believe it or not. Scholars still argue whether medieval people were really as dirty as we imagine, or whether they bathed more often than the myths suggest. Some evidence shows they washed frequently. Others suggest they avoided water altogether. The truth, like always, is somewhere in between. And we'll get into that when we arrive in the shadowy stone castles and narrow city streets of the Middle Ages. For now, just breathe slowly, as if you're walking with me through this odd museum of human hygiene. You're surrounded by stone floors, clay jars, wooden stools, and the murmur of voices in a language you don't quite understand. Every culture has left behind clues, broken pipes, graffiti on latrine walls, even fossilized toilet remains that archaeologists have studied with far too much enthusiasm. And as weird as it sounds, these small, ordinary objects tell us just as much about the past as kings, wars, or monuments do. Think of it this way. Everyone eats, everyone sleeps, and yes, everyone needs a bathroom. In the grand scheme of things, bathrooms might be the most democratic part of history. They remind us that no matter how rich, powerful, or famous someone was, they still had to find a place to sit down and, well, you get the picture. Somehow that makes history a little more relatable. Your journey tonight is going to wander across empires and centuries, from Mesopotamian clay pipes to Roman latrines, from hammams glowing with lanterns to freezing garderobes and castle walls. You'll see it all, slowly, gently, as if you're flipping pages in a half-forgotten book. You'll pause to notice the quirks, The odd smells, the awkward customs. And maybe, just maybe, you'll chuckle at how strangely human it all feels. And the best part? The more boring it gets, the sleepier you'll become. By the time we reach the Victorians tinkering with their porcelain flush toilets, you might already be deep in dreams wandering through You drift further into the quiet corridors of time, leaving behind the familiar comfort of modern plumbing. Before there were tiles and mirrors, before there were even cities, humans still had to solve the same daily problem. And in those earliest days, the solution was simple. Too simple, really. Picture yourself thousands of years ago, standing on a stretch of bare earth, maybe near a small cluster of huts made of reeds or mud. There's no pipe, no outhouse, not even a pot, just a patch of dirt, sometimes a shallow hole dug into the ground. The first bathrooms were nothing more than pits. People squatted, covered it up with soil, and walked away. Primitive but effective. You wander around this landscape, noticing that even in such a basic form, these pits kept communities a little cleaner than if waste was just left in the open. But humans are inventive, even when it comes to such unglamorous things. Archaeologists have uncovered clay, vessels, large jars used not only for food and storage, but sometimes for waste. Imagine someone crouching awkwardly over a pot, and then carefully emptying it later. It's not glamorous, but it shows how people were already trying to separate private life from public mess. You glance into one of these jars and quickly look away. Your imagination fills in too much detail. In places like early Mesopotamia, where villages clustered around rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates, waste pits sometimes connected to small ditches that carried things away with rainwater. That's a clever leap forward. Humans realizing that water could be used to move and hide what they didn't want lying around. Think about that. Long before flush toilets, someone already noticed that flowing water was a good friend in awkward situations. And here's a quirky fact. The oldest toilet archaeologists have found is over 4,000 years old, in a palace in Scotland of all places. It was basically a stone seat over a channel that ran to a drain. You can almost see a weary chieftain sitting there, trying to feel royal while doing something very ordinary. That image alone might be enough to make you smile sleepily. As you walk through this early timeline, you notice how these primitive solutions were deeply tied to survival. Sanitation wasn't about comfort, it was about staying alive. Waste attracted flies, flies carried disease, and communities quickly learned that some kind of system was better than none, even if that system was just dig a hole and don't forget to cover it. Scholars still argue whether prehistoric societies thought about cleanliness in the way we do. Did they see waste as something dangerous or just unpleasant? Was it ritual, superstition, or simple practicality that made them dig those pits? The debates continue, but the truth is probably a mix. You imagine villagers performing little habits, maybe avoiding certain spots, maybe saying a quiet word of protection before stepping away. And because humans love routine, even in the simplest times, these pits often became designated spots. A short walk outside the village, hidden behind bushes or near a stream. You wander to one of these spots in your imagination now. The earth smells damp, the air is cooler, and you sense how these early people built unspoken rules. Don't go here. Stay downwind, and for goodness sake, wash your hands in the river afterward. Oddly enough, these humble pits connect us to the later marvels of plumbing. They're the ancestors of stone seats, marble baths, and copper pipes. Without them, there's no starting point, no gradual refinement. It's almost funny to think that our sleek bathrooms today began with someone crouching in a hole in the dirt. And if you think that sounds boring, well, that's the point. The quiet rhythm of history, even in its messiest moments, has a way of slowing your thoughts. You notice the wind brushing past your ears, the soft rustle of grass near the pit, the quiet of an ancient night sky without city lights. These early bathrooms weren't just crude. They were surrounded by silence, stars, and a sense of vast emptiness. So you keep wandering, one step at a time, from dirt pits to clay jars, from survival necessity to the first sparks of plumbing genius. History is already moving forward, carrying you along with it. You step forward again, further into the winding corridors of time, and suddenly you're no longer in the vague prehistory of dirt pits and clay jars. Instead, the world around you grows more structured. Mud brick houses rise on either side of you. Narrow streets twist toward the river, and the air carries a mix of cooking fires, animal smells, and something else that you try not to think too hard about. You've arrived in Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, where some of the earliest cities on Earth took shape. And here, surprisingly, bathrooms start to look a little more recognizable. You wander through the ruins of an ancient house. Nothing grand, just a modest mud brick home with 2 small rooms. In one corner, you see a carefully made pit lined with baked clay. It's not much, but you realize it's intentional. This wasn't a random hole in the ground. It was a designed space for doing what needed to be done. Sometimes there were even vertical shafts, little channels that carried waste downward, away from the house and out toward a drainage ditch. The thought sinks in. Even 4,500 years ago, people were engineering ways to separate themselves from their waste. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't privacy in the way we think of it. But it was practical, and for its time, it was genius. Archaeologists digging in cities like Ur and Babylon have found terracotta pipes, yes, actual pipes fitted together with bitumen, a sticky tar-like substance. These pipes carried wastewater out of homes, down into larger drains beneath the streets. You can almost hear the faint trickle of liquid slipping through clay tunnels under your feet. The sound is oddly soothing, a quiet background hum in this ancient city. Now it wasn't perfect. The streets still smelled and open sewage was common. People still threw things out into alleys, but these pipes, these drains, were the beginning of something revolutionary. Mesopotamians were some of the first to think, let's build the mess out of sight. And that thought echoes through history. Here's a quirky little detail. Some Mesopotamian toilets were raised, like a throne made of clay, with a hole in the top leading to a pit. It's hard not to chuckle at the image. You picture someone sitting there, surrounded by plain mud walls, trying to feel important while balancing on what is basically a baked clay box. Maybe that's why archaeologists sometimes call them toilet thrones. Not very glamorous, but definitely memorable. And yet, even with these innovations, sanitation was a daily struggle. Wastewater ran down open drains that cut through neighborhoods. Rain carried it further, sometimes right into the river. And what was the river used for? Washing clothes, fetching water, maybe even drinking on a desperate day. You can almost feel the shiver of discomfort at that thought. Scholars still argue about how widespread these plumbing systems were. Were they common in everyday houses, or reserved for the wealthy elite? Some ruins suggest that even modest homes had access to drainage, while others hint that only the higher classes could afford such designs. The debate lingers, and maybe it always will, because history tends to leave us with half answers, broken fragments and questions we'll never fully solve. But what can't be denied is that Mesopotamia set the stage. These pipes, drains, and pits were the ancestors of everything that came later. Without them, the Romans wouldn't have dreamed of aqueducts. Without them, cities might have collapsed under the weight of their own waste. As you walk through the ancient streets in your imagination, you notice details others might miss. The brickwork feels rough beneath your fingertips. The air is heavy, buzzing with flies. Somewhere nearby, a child darts across the alley, carrying a jug of water from the river. And beneath it all, unseen but present, waste trickles slowly through the underground drains. There's something oddly comforting in that steady rhythm. Human life, even in its messiest moments, always finds a system, always finds a pattern. You let yourself breathe slowly, as though matching the pace of that trickling water. The hum of Mesopotamia wraps around you, the calls of merchants in the market, the creak of wooden carts, the splashing of buckets lowered into wells. It's noisy, busy, alive, and yet you feel yourself sinking deeper into calm. Because no matter how bustling the city, the history of bathrooms reminds you that people always paused for the same quiet moments. Behind every closed door, behind every clay wall, someone was sitting in stillness, alone with their thoughts, just as you might be now. And so Mesopotamia's story of early toilets isn't just about clay and drains. It's about the first steps toward carving privacy, order, and dignity into the chaos of urban life. Steps that would carry forward, winding through centuries, shaping how the world handled the most ordinary human need. The heat changes as you step out of Mesopotamia and into Egypt. The air grows dry. The sun presses down with its desert weight, and everything around you seems to glow in shades of sand and stone. The Nile glitters in the distance, the river that gave life to this entire civilization. And here, among the temples and tombs, people cared deeply about something that seems surprisingly modern: cleanliness. For the Egyptians, hygiene wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. To stay clean was to stay pure, both in the eyes of the gods and in daily life. You wander through the narrow alley of an ancient town, and you notice the people here bathe often. The river provides the water, and natron, a natural salt that forms on dry lake beds, provides the soap. Imagine scrubbing your skin with gritty white crystals, the salt biting gently, stripping away dirt and sweat. Not exactly the soft lather of a modern shower gel, but for them, it was sacred. Inside some homes, you find simple stone basins. Water is poured from jars, flowing cool over the skin, rinsing away dust. It's not a bathroom in the way you know it today, but it's a space for cleansing. Even the poorest Egyptians tried to wash regularly, because in their climate, dirt clung to you in layers. Sweat, sand, and smoke from cooking fires all mixed together. Without washing, life would have been unbearable. And here's something quirky. Egyptians shaved most of their body hair for hygiene. Priests in particular were obsessed with being spotless. They shaved their heads, their arms, even their eyebrows. Cleanliness was next to godliness, quite literally. You can almost picture a temple priest stepping into a cool pool of water, freshly shaved, muttering a prayer as he washes with natron. But it wasn't just about ritual. Practical bathrooms existed too. Archaeologists have found early toilets in Egyptian houses, simple limestone seats with a hole cut in the center, leading to a sand-filled jar beneath. Imagine sitting on a block of stone, the edges cold against your thighs, with a jar waiting patiently below. Not luxurious, but functional. Someone would empty the jar later, carrying it outside the home. The system was basic, but it kept households from being overwhelmed by their own waste. Walking through these imagined streets, you notice another detail. The Egyptians used perfumes and oils constantly. After bathing, they rubbed scented oils onto their skin, partly for beauty, partly to keep the skin from drying out in the desert sun, but also to mask less pleasant smells. Even a common laborer might dab on a bit of oil if they could afford it. Meanwhile, the wealthy covered themselves in expensive fragrances, lotus flower, cinnamon, frankincense, smelling like walking temples. Scholars still argue how widespread these stone seat toilets and washing basins were. Were they luxuries for the elite, or did everyday families have them too? Some evidence suggests that in wealthier houses, bathrooms were built with care, while poorer homes relied on jars and simple outdoor pits. But whether rich or poor, the obsession with washing united everyone. And of course, the Egyptians tied it all to the afterlife. In tomb paintings, servants are shown pouring water over their masters, scrubbing them with cloths, combing their hair, anointing them with oil. To be clean was not only important in life, but also something you carried with you into eternity. Even the gods were imagined as fragrant, glowing beings. One odd detail stands out. In some tombs, archaeologists have found small alabaster jars with solidified remnants of perfume, thousands of years old but still faintly scented when opened. Imagine that, a fragrance lingering across millennia, a whisper from someone's bathroom shelf in the age of the pyramids. As you picture all this, you begin to notice the contrast. The Egyptians lived surrounded by heat, sweat, and dust, yet their daily lives pulsed with a ritual of cleansing. In the morning, a splash of Nile water. At midday, oil rubbed into sunburnt skin. In the evening, a priest dipping into sacred pools. Over and over, this rhythm of washing, scrubbing, oiling, and perfuming shaped their days. And you, wandering through these images in your mind, feel a strange kind of calm. The act of washing, repeated across centuries, becomes almost hypnotic. You hear the soft splash of water against stone, the scrape of a clay jar being set down, the murmur of a prayer to the gods of purity. So, in Egypt, the bathroom wasn't just a corner of the house. It was a meeting place between the human body and the divine. Every wash, every scrub, every scented oil was part of something bigger. And as the sun sets over the desert, and the Nile reflects the last golden light, you realize that even the simplest bathroom, routine once carried the weight of eternity. The scene shifts once again, this time to the rocky hills and bustling cities of ancient Greece. The world here is brighter, louder, more open. Stone columns rise against blue skies, market stalls buzz with chatter, and everywhere people gather. In theaters, in assemblies, and, most importantly for our story, in public baths. To the Greeks, bathing was not only about hygiene, it was a deeply social act. You step into one of their public spaces, and immediately you notice how different it feels compared to the private washing basins of Egypt. Here, people bathe together. The air is warm with steam, voices echo against marble walls, and the splash of water mingles with laughter and debate. At first, Greek bathing was simple. Athletes, after training in the gymnasium, would scrape sweat and oil from their skin using a tool called a strigil. Imagine a curved piece of bronze, cool to the touch, sliding across the body and pulling away layers of grime. It wasn't glamorous, but it was effective. Afterward, they might rinse themselves off with cold water, poured from ceramic jugs. But over time, bathing became more elaborate. You find yourself standing inside a Greek lutron, a bathhouse. The floor is stone, sometimes decorated with mosaics, and basins are arranged around the room. Bathers fill them with water carried from nearby fountains or aqueducts. In wealthier cities, you might even encounter heated baths, with warm water provided by clever underground systems. The atmosphere is lively. Men gather in one section, women in another, and conversation flows as freely as the water. Politics, philosophy, and gossip mix together. A young student might discuss rhetoric with his teacher while scrubbing his arms. A merchant might strike a business deal while rinsing his hair. The bath is not private. It's a stage where the rhythms of society play out in the open. The smells are memorable too. Olive oil rubbed onto the skin after bathing, mixed with the sharp tang of sweat, the earthy scent of clay basins, and faint notes of herbal perfumes. Olive oil was central to the whole ritual. Instead of soap, the Greeks coated themselves in oil, then scraped it off with the strigil, carrying away dirt with it. Afterward, they reapplied oil to keep their skin soft. Imagine that slick, slightly sticky feeling of oil covering your arms and chest, then the satisfying scrape as it lifts away. Not everyone approved. Philosophers sometimes criticized the growing indulgence of elaborate baths, claiming they made people soft. But for most Greeks it was normal, even necessary. Especially in cities where water flowed freely, bathing was a way of life. In Athens, aqueducts and public fountains made water abundant, and so bathhouses became a hub of civic life. You linger in one of these imagined bathhouses. Around you, athletes rest after training, their muscles glistening with oil. A group of elders sit nearby, discussing politics in hushed but animated tones. Children splash water, earning sharp looks from their mothers. The whole scene hums with life, and yet there is also a quieter side. Some Greeks bathed at home, using ceramic basins filled with water drawn from wells. The process was slower, less communal. Picture a woman pouring cool water over her shoulders from a jug, the liquid streaming down her tunic as she tries to wash away the dust of the day. It's humble, but it carries the same intention: refreshment, renewal. One detail stands out: the link between bathing and religion. Before entering certain temples, worshippers washed themselves as a form of purification. Sacred fountains were built near sanctuaries, offering ritual cleansing before approaching the gods. Bathing wasn't just about looking clean. It was about being worthy to stand in holy spaces. And like the Egyptians, the Greeks had their luxuries. Wealthy households sometimes had their own small bath areas, equipped with large ceramic tubs. Archaeologists have even uncovered bathtubs in palaces, like the one at Knossos in Crete, shaped much like modern tubs but carved from clay. Imagine lowering yourself into one of those. The water lukewarm, the tub cool against your skin. But perhaps the most fascinating part is how central bathing was to Greek culture of conversation. Think about it. Many of the ideas that shaped Western philosophy, debates about virtue, politics, and truth may have been spoken, not only in lecture halls, but also in gymnasiums and bathhouses. Plato's dialogues come alive when you imagine them taking place among men fresh from the oil and strigil, their voices echoing through steam-filled rooms. As time passes, Greek bathing practices grow more elaborate, paving the way for the grand bathhouses of Rome. The architecture becomes more refined, the heating systems more advanced, the space is larger and more luxurious. But here, in these earlier centuries, you sense the beginnings of that tradition. Small, bustling rooms where people came not only to clean themselves, but to connect, to share ideas, to live as part of a community. You pause for a moment, listening. Water drips from stone basins, footsteps slap against wet floors, and voices rise and fall in animated debate. It's strangely calming, even though it is busy, like white noise from another era. The rhythm of daily life preserved in echoes. And so, in ancient Greece, the bathroom was never just about hygiene. It was about society, philosophy, and even spirituality. Every scrape of the strigil, every splash of water, every shared word between bathers was part of a ritual that connected individuals to each other and to their city. As you step back from this image, you can almost feel the warmth of the bathhouse clinging to your skin, the faint sheen of olive oil on your arms, the sound of voices fading into silence. Another piece of history, ordinary yet extraordinary, carried across centuries and into your dreams. Now, picture yourself leaving the Greek world behind, stepping across the Aegean, and finding yourself in the very heart of Rome. If the Greeks planted the seeds of public bathing, The Romans turned it into a vast empire of steam, water, and stone. And you're about to walk into one of their famous latrines. Forget your modern bathroom with its door, its privacy, its neat lock. Roman latrines were public, communal, and sometimes even glamorous. You walk into a long stone room, cool and echoing, with a row of smooth marble benches set side by side. Each bench has neat round holes carved into it, spaced evenly like chairs at a dinner party. Only here, the meal is not food. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, handling your most private business in full view of everyone else. Awkward, definitely. But for Romans, it was normal. They saw no shame in it. In fact, these spaces were designed to encourage conversation. As you imagine yourself seated there, you hear voices echoing, men gossiping about politics, merchants striking deals, neighbors catching up on family news. What would be a mortifying silence for you is, for them, another part of daily life. And cleanliness? Well, the Romans had a system. Instead of toilet paper, they used a tersorium, a sponge on a stick. After use, it was rinsed in a bucket of water or vinegar placed nearby, then shared by the next person. Yes, shared. You shift uncomfortably at the thought, but to them, it was practical. The engineering was remarkable. Beneath the benches ran channels of flowing water, constantly carrying waste away to the sewers. The most famous of these was the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's massive drainage system, which still survives in fragments today. Imagine the gurgle of water flowing beneath your feet, the faint smell of damp stone, and yes, something less pleasant too. Of course, not every Roman embraced these public latrines. The wealthy preferred private facilities in their homes, small rooms with their own benches, connected to the same sewer system. But even then, the idea of privacy was different from ours. A Roman noble might host a guest in his house, offer wine, and then casually continue a conversation while both of them used the facilities. For them, the boundaries between public and private life were not drawn as sharply as ours. You wander now into a bathhouse because in Rome, the latrine was just one part of a larger story. The thermae, those grand public baths, were the pride of the empire. Step inside and it's like entering a palace. Vast halls with vaulted ceilings stretch before you, light streaming through high windows, mosaics glittering underfoot. Marble pools reflect the glow of braziers and steam curls upward in soft plumes. There is an order to the rooms. First, you move into the appetiterium, the changing room, where you undress and store your clothes. Slaves or attendants stand ready to help while chatter fills the air. Then comes the tepidarium, a warm room to ease your body into relaxation. The walls radiate gentle heat, delivered by a system called hypocausts. Imagine warm air rising through the floors and walls, the whole room humming like a giant oven. From there, you choose your path. Maybe the caldarium, the hot bath, where water shimmers and steam makes the air thick. Here you sweat, purge, and soak your muscles. Or maybe the frigidarium, a plunge pool of icy water, designed to shock the system and leave you tingling. You can almost feel the jolt as you picture yourself stepping in, goosebumps rising instantly. The baths were not only about cleaning the body, they were cultural centers. You could find libraries attached to them, gardens for strolling, gyms for exercise, even shops and food stalls. Senators met to discuss politics, poets recited verses, merchants sealed contracts, all while wrapped in towels dripping from the pools. And of course, there were the quirks. Romans often used oils to clean themselves, much like the Greeks. Slaves would rub the oil onto the skin, then scrape it off with a curved strigil. Sometimes the scrapings of sweat and oil, called gloios, were even collected and sold as medicine. Yes, people actually believed that used bath oil could cure ailments. You shudder slightly, but it's true. Scholars still argue whether these bathhouses truly reflected Roman ideals of equality. After all, while emperors built them for the public, slaves and women often had restricted access. Some baths had separate hours for men and women, others mixed both. The details vary, and historians debate just how inclusive these grand spaces really were. For the emperors, though, the baths were propaganda. Caracalla, Diocletian, and others built enormous complexes to show their generosity and power. Imagine walking through the baths of Caracalla, towering columns, ceilings painted with stars, pools stretching wide enough to hold hundreds at once. The sheer scale is meant to overwhelm you, to remind you of Rome's greatness. And in the midst of all this grandeur, the bathroom, the latrine, remains ever present, tucked away but essential. For all their mosaics and marbles, the Romans never forgot that hygiene was both public and necessary. As you linger in this imagined bathhouse, The sounds wash over you, the murmur of voices, the splash of water, the hiss of steam, and somewhere, the steady gurgle of drains carrying everything away. It's busy, it's communal, it's strangely ordinary, and yet it tells you so much about what it meant to live in Rome. To be part of a world where even bathing and relieving yourself were woven into the fabric of civic life. The steam fades, the marble cools, and you step back, carrying the echoes with you. Another piece of boring history, except it isn't boring at all. It's human, intimate, and just a little awkward. You're still in Rome, but now, instead of lingering near the latrines or dipping your toes into just one pool, you decide to go all in. You push open a tall wooden door and step into the heart of a Roman therme, one of the city's grand public bathhouses. The first thing you notice is the space. It's enormous. Columns stretch upward into arches. Light spills in from high windows, and the whole place smells faintly of steam, oil, and wet stone. The sound is a constant background hum, water splashing, voices carrying, sandals scuffing across mosaic floors. It's not quiet or private. It's busy, social, alive. You pass into the apoditerium, the changing room, where men of all classes strip down and leave their clothes with attendants. The atmosphere is surprisingly casual. Senators, merchants, soldiers, and farmers might all rub shoulders here, bare skin gleaming in the lamplight. There's laughter, some jostling, even a little arguing. Bathhouses were the great equalizers of Rome, at least, that's what the emperors wanted you to believe. From there you wander into the tepidarium, the warm room. Heat radiates from the walls and floors, powered by the Hippocaust, Rome's underfloor heating system. Slaves shovel wood into furnaces below, and hot air circulates through brick channels hidden beneath the marble tiles. You feel the warmth seeping into your body, loosening your shoulders, making you drowsy. The caldarium comes next, the hot bath. The air is thick with steam, so heavy it curls into your lungs and makes your skin bead with sweat almost instantly. You slide into the water, and it's scalding, but in that soothing way, the kind that makes your muscles relax as if they've been waiting for this moment all day. Around you, men lounge against the marble edges, talking politics, gossiping about gladiators, or simply sighing with relief. Some bring along perfumed oils, rubbing them into their skin before scraping them off with bronze strigils. You can almost hear the soft scrape and smell the faint herbal tang in the air. Then, for the bold or the foolish, there's the frigidarium, a massive plunge pool filled with icy water brought in from aqueducts. You step in and your entire body jolts. The cold hits like a wave, your breath catches, and goosebumps race across your arms. Men shout and laugh as they dunk themselves, treating it like both a dare and a ritual. For them, the shock was invigorating, a way to cleanse not just the body, but the spirit. The palestra, the exercise yard, is nearby. Some bathers wrestle, practice with weights, or toss balls before bathing again. The rhythm is endless. Sweat, scrape, soak, shock, and repeat. For many Romans, the bathhouse wasn't a one-hour stop. It was the centerpiece of the day, where hours disappeared in heat and chatter. And here's the quirky detail. Sometimes, the used oil and sweat scraped from bathers' bodies, that grimy gloios, was collected in jars. People actually bought it, believing it could heal injuries or improve skin. Imagine a little clay pot of secondhand bath residue sitting on a market stall. Now that's ancient skincare you're glad you didn't inherit. But the bathhouse was more than hygiene or indulgence. It was where Rome itself lived. Poets might recite verses while reclining in the warm pools. Politicians whispered deals in the corners. Lovers found excuses to linger, and rivals argued philosophy while steam blurred their outlines. For the poor, who had no private baths at home, this was their only chance to feel clean, to feel part of something greater. For the rich, it was another way to display wealth, arriving with fine oils, servants in fancy sandals. Scholars still argue whether bathhouses truly broke down class barriers. Did senators really bathe alongside common soldiers? Or was the idea of equality just propaganda carved into stone inscriptions? Archaeologists find hints of both. The grand spaces designed for everyone, but side rooms and separate hours that suggest lines were still drawn. Even the architecture was part of the theater. The baths of Caracalla could hold thousands of people at once. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, decorated with painted stars, while massive pools stretched out like small lakes. Walking through them, you couldn't help but feel awe, not just at the size, but at the idea that water itself was being offered to you by the empire. It wasn't just bathing. It was Rome showing off its power. And yet, amid all the grandeur, the rituals were strangely intimate. You picture yourself moving from one pool to another, the hot caldarium leaving you flushed, the cold plunge leaving you gasping, the strigil scrape leaving your skin tingling. You hear laughter echoing in the vaulted halls, smell the faint resin of burning wood from the furnaces, feel the soft towel pressed into your hand by an attendant. It's overwhelming and yet calming. A rhythm of life. Hours pass this way, at least in your imagination. For Romans, the bathhouse wasn't about rushing. It was about being part of a flow, a cycle of heat, water, oil, and conversation. You come away not just clean, but refreshed, renewed, and reconnected. By the time you leave, the sun is setting, casting long shadows across the city streets. Your body feels heavy, your mind quieter, lulled by the warmth still clinging to your skin. And maybe, just maybe, you've glimpsed why these bathhouses were more than stone and water. They were the heartbeat of Rome itself. You step out of the steam-filled halls of Rome's grand bathhouses, and the air suddenly feels colder, thinner, emptier. The marble mosaics, the glittering fountains, the hum of hundreds of voices, gone. The Roman world is collapsing, and with it, the easy luxury of daily bathing begins to fade. Imagine the streets of a once bustling Roman town. Cracked aqueducts stand silent, their arches still stretching across valleys, but no longer, carrying clean water into the city. The sewers clog, fountains dry up. Public bathhouses, once buzzing with laughter and steam, become ghostly shells. The scent of olive oil is replaced by the musty smell of neglect, weeds pushing through broken tiles. Why did this happen? Partly it was the fall of centralized government. When Rome's political and economic systems crumbled, so did the infrastructure that had kept the baths alive. Heating a caldarium or pumping water into frigidariums wasn't something one person could do alone. It took an empire's resources. Without emperors eager to show off their generosity, the fires of the hippocausts simply went out. And there was another factor, fear. As Christianity spread, attitudes toward bathing shifted. Some church leaders preached that public baths, often associated with nudity, indulgence, and even promiscuity, encouraged sinful behavior. Washing the soul was more important than washing the body. Suddenly, the once proud rituals of Rome seemed less like civic duty and more like dangerous temptation. You find yourself in the early medieval period. People still bathe, of course, but the scale is nothing like before. Instead of sprawling bathhouses with mosaics and marble, you see small wooden tubs in cottages, often shared by entire families. A bucket of water is heated over the fire, poured into the tub, and used until it turns cloudy and cool. You can almost picture it, the steam rising weakly, the damp straw floors beneath your feet, the earthy smell of smoke clinging to your skin even after the wash. And for many, even that luxury is rare. In colder climates, water is precious in winter. Some people go weeks without a proper wash, relying instead on linen underclothes to absorb sweat, then changing and laundering those instead of washing their skin. Imagine scratching at itchy wool garments, your body sticky with layers of grime, and realizing this was considered normal. Scholars still argue whether medieval people were as dirty as the stereotype suggests. Some evidence suggests that people bathed more often than we think, using rivers, streams, or heated tubs when possible. Monasteries often had strict rules about washing, linking cleanliness with discipline and spiritual purity. But compared to the golden age of Roman baths, it was a dramatic decline. You notice how attitudes shift. Where Romans thought bathing together was civic and social, medieval Europeans often saw it as suspicious or dangerous. Public bathhouses that did survive were sometimes associated with disease, or worse, immorality. By the time of the Black Death, people even believed that bathing too often could weaken the body and make it more vulnerable to plague. Cleanliness, ironically, was seen as risky, and yet fragments of Rome lingered. In some places, aqueducts continued to function, at least partially. Wealthy households might still boast private baths, echoing the luxuries of the past. In the Byzantine world, Roman-style baths carried on much longer, blending with new cultural practices. But in the Western lands, the memory of marble halls filled with steam and chatter faded into legend. You stand now in the ruins of a Roman therme, centuries after its glory. Weeds crawl across the cracked mosaics. Rain seeps through broken roofs, and silence hangs in the air. Where once thousands bathed daily, now only a shepherd passes through, leading his flock across the fallen stones. The sound of water is gone. The communal heartbeat has stilled. And yet, even in decline, the story continues. People still needed to wash, to improvise, to adapt. The bathhouse culture that once defined Rome may have withered, but it left behind whispers, habits, inventions, and fragments that would someday re-emerge in new forms. So you walk away from the crumbling baths, stepping into a world of wooden tubs, smoky cottages, and long stretches of unwashed skin. The age of grandeur is over, and a new chapter, darker, dirtier, but still deeply human, has begun. The marble halls of Rome are far behind you now. Instead, you're standing in the middle of a cramped medieval town. The streets narrow, the houses leaning inward like gossiping neighbors. The air is thick, not with steam or olive oil this time, but with something far less pleasant. Welcome to the age of chamber pots. You step inside a modest home, its wooden beams low, a fire crackling in the hearth. In the corner, near the bed, sits a humble object, a chamber pot. It's not glamorous, not decorated with mosaics or bronze fittings. It's just a ceramic or metal bowl, practical and plain. And yes, this is where business gets done. No marble benches, no communal chatter, just you, your pot, and the awkward sound of relief echoing in the small room. At night, when it's too cold or too dangerous to stumble through the streets, the chamber pot is your savior. Picture it. You wake up in the middle of the night. The fire is burned low and the wind rattles the shutters. Instead of venturing out to the freezing yard or the town ditch, you simply roll over, grab the pot, and, well, make do. It's intimate, a little undignified, but utterly practical. But here's the catch. In the morning, that pot has to go somewhere. And that's where things get messy. People emptied their chamber pots into cesspits, ditches, or all too often, straight into the street. Imagine leaning out of an upper window with a pot in your hands, shouting a warning, "Gardy-loo!" in some places, before tipping the contents onto the cobblestones below. The liquid splashes, runs along the uneven stones, and eventually drains toward the nearest gutter. If you're unlucky enough to be passing underneath at that exact moment, well, you'd better hope you're fast on your feet. Walking down a medieval street wasn't just an exercise in patience. It was an obstacle course. The smell clings to you, mixing with the sense of livestock, fish markets, and smoke from open hearths. Your shoes squelch in ways you'd rather not think about. Suddenly, that cozy Roman latrine with its marble benches doesn't sound so bad anymore. Of course, the wealthy had slightly better options. Some castles and manor houses had garderobes, stone rooms with holes, built into the outer walls, often dropping waste straight into the moat. Romantic image, right? A glittering castle reflected in its water. Except that water might also carry everything flushed from the castle's inhabitants. Picture leaning over a stone seat, chilly wind rushing up from the shaft, while below, your waist lands in the moat where geese paddle around. Practical, but hardly glamorous. Still, the chamber pot was universal. Kings, queens, peasants, they all used some version of it. Royalty might have pots made of silver, even decorated with fine engravings, but the function remained the same. A pot is a pot, no matter how much gold you pour on it. And here's your quirky detail. Sometimes, servants had the unfortunate job of being the groom of the stool. Yes, that was an actual position in royal households, attendants, tasked with managing the monarch's chamber pot and even assisting with the act itself. Imagine your career path leading you there. Loyal, trusted, and uncomfortably close to your king's most private moments. Scholars still argue whether chamber pots made city life worse or better. On one hand, they kept waste contained indoors until it could be emptied. On the other hand, once dumped into the streets, they added to the overwhelming stench and filth. Archaeological digs in old European cities often uncover entire pits full of broken chamber pots, a reminder of how common and necessary they were. You glance again at that simple ceramic pot in the corner of the room. It's small, quiet, unassuming, yet it carried a civilization through cold nights, busy mornings, and crowded cities. It's not the glamorous side of history, but it's the real one. The side that shows how people lived, survived, and adapted when marble aqueducts and heated caldariums were nothing more than distant memories. And so you leave the chamber pot behind, stepping back out into the crowded street. The air is sharp, the cobblestones damp, and the faint cry of someone emptying their window echoes down the alley. History may be boring, but right now, it smells anything but medieval town and climb, the winding road toward a stone fortress. Its towers rise above the mist, banners flapping in the cold wind. Castles might look glamorous from the outside, but once you step inside, you quickly realize the bathroom situation is still pretty grim. Welcome to the world of castle privies. You walk along a drafty corridor and find a small wooden door tucked into the thick stone wall. Inside, there's no luxurious chamber, no steaming pool, just a narrow stone bench with a hole carved into it. Beneath that hole, nothing but open air, or in some cases the castle moat. This, my friend, is the garderobe. It's as simple as it sounds. You sit, you do your business, and gravity takes care of the rest. Waste drops down a shaft built into the wall, sometimes landing directly into the water below, sometimes into a cesspit or onto the bare ground outside. Imagine leaning forward slightly, feeling the icy wind rush up from the chute, reminding you exactly how exposed you really are. You shiver, not from fear but from the sheer cold air blasting your backside. And here's the kicker. Garderobes were often placed on outer walls of castles. Practical, sure, because it kept waste outside, but it also meant that enemies during a siege could, in theory, crawl up through the shaft. Yes, the least dignified entrance imaginable. Picture a desperate invader climbing into the castle, covered in, well, let's just say they weren't greeted with roses. For the castle's inhabitants, using the garderobe was just another part of life. Some garderobes were even placed in towers or turrets, sticking out from the main walls like stone birdhouses. From the outside, you might spot little projections with tiny windows. Cute, almost, until you realize their true purpose. Not a balcony, not a lookout, but a medieval toilet dangling over the moat. You settle onto the cold stone seat in your imagination. The surface is rough, the opening wide enough to feel just a little unsafe. The wind howls through the shaft, carrying with it the smell of the moat below. If you're unlucky, you might hear the splash and see a goose flapping in outrage. And when winter comes, forget comfort. Sitting on that freezing slab would make you wish you'd just stayed in bed with a chamber pot instead. Of course, castles weren't without some clever solutions. Sometimes garderobes were lined with moss, straw, or cloth to keep things less drafty. Attendants might pour buckets of water or even lie down the chute to reduce the smell. But in truth, it was still a far cry from the grand heated systems of Rome. There's even a quirky superstition attached. People often stored clothes in garderobes because the ammonia fumes from waste were thought to deter moths and lice. Yes, that means your precious cloak might hang right above the castle toilet shaft, marinating in the scent of, well, you get the idea. Fashion and function combined in the strangest way. And again, scholars still argue about how private these garderobes really were. Castles were busy places, full of servants, guards, and family members. Walls were thin, doors flimsy, and sound traveled. Privacy was less a guarantee and more a polite fiction. The idea of sneaking off for a quiet, solitary bathroom break? That was more fantasy than reality. You walk through the castle now, passing one garderobe after another, each tucked into towers, hidden alcoves, or perched above the moat. Some are single holes, others long stone benches with multiple openings for group use. Yes, communal even here. The smell lingers faintly in the cold air carried through drafty passages. And yet, despite the discomfort, the garderobe was an essential part of castle life. It kept waste away from the inner rooms, reduced disease, at least compared to tossing chamber pots into the streets, and gave inhabitants some semblance of sanitation. Crude, yes, effective mostly. As you step back outside, you glance up at the castle walls. Those little stone turrets and protrusions suddenly look different. Not just defenses or architectural flourishes, but reminders of how ordinary, messy life continued inside those mighty walls. Even kings and queens, armored knights, and powerful lords had to face the cold seat and the howling wind. And as the castle looms above you, you realize history isn't just battles and banners. Sometimes it's about sitting on a freezing stone bench, hoping the draft doesn't freeze you in place, and being very grateful you weren't born in the 13th century. You leave the drafty stone castle behind and step into a new world, warm, perfumed, and humming with quiet conversation. The contrast is immediate. Instead of icy stone seats and gusts of wind from garderobe shafts, you're greeted by the gentle scent of rosewater, the sound of splashing basins, and the glow of oil lamps bouncing off mosaicked walls. Welcome to the Islamic hammam, a place where bathing was not only about hygiene, but also about ritual, spirituality, and community. You step through an arched doorway, the kind decorated with intricate calligraphy and patterned tiles. Inside, steam rises in soft waves. The room is warm, not suffocatingly hot, but perfectly comfortable. Water trickles through channels cut into stone, collecting in shallow pools. You dip your toes into the nearest basin and instantly feel the day's dust fade away. Unlike the cold draft of medieval Europe, here bathing is an act of intention. Hammams are often attached to mosques, their purpose rooted in the Islamic emphasis on cleanliness. Ritual washing before prayer is central to daily life, and hammams make this not just practical but pleasurable. You scoop water into your hands, letting it cascade over your face. The warmth isn't just physical, it feels almost spiritual, as though each drop is washing away more than dirt. And you're not alone. Around you, men or women, depending on the designated time of day, sit on stone benches, chatting quietly, scrubbing with soap, or stretching out as attendants pour water over them. It's communal but not chaotic. The acoustics of the domed ceilings turn whispers into soft echoes, giving the whole space a meditative vibe. You can almost hear the hum of centuries of conversation layered into the walls. One odd but delightful detail. Hammam attendants often used a rough mitt, called a kize, to exfoliate the skin. Imagine someone scrubbing your back with just enough pressure to make you wince. But in the end, you're left silky smooth. Flakes of old skin fall away and you feel oddly reborn. It's the kind of experience that's both slightly uncomfortable and deeply satisfying. You picture medieval lords sitting on their freezing garderobes and can't help but smirk. They definitely missed out on this. And the architecture. Hammams weren't just functional, they were beautiful. Domed ceilings with tiny star-shaped openings let in shafts of light. Walls were often covered in mosaics, colored tiles in blues and greens that shimmered in the steam. Some hammams even had marble floors, warmed by hypocaust systems similar to Roman underfloor heating. You can imagine lying on one of those heated stones, letting the warmth soak into your bones as the world outside fades away. Of course, scholars still argue whether hammams were primarily religious spaces, social hubs, or both. Were they more about preparing for prayer, or about gossip, matchmaking, and business deals? The truth is probably a mix. You overhear laughter in one corner, serious conversation in another. Someone whispers a bit of market news, while another talks about a potential marriage. Cleanliness and community blend seamlessly, and the rituals go beyond water. Oils and perfumes play a big role. You watch as someone massages fragrant oils into their skin: jasmine, sandalwood, rose. The air is thick with the mix, creating an almost intoxicating calm. This isn't just hygiene, it's sensory luxury. Now, here's the quirky part. Hammams were sometimes associated with superstitions. 2. People believed jinn could lurk in the corners, especially late at night. To ward them off, bathers might recite prayers or carry charms. You glance into the steamy shadows and half expect glowing eyes to peer back. But instead, it's just another bather adjusting their towel, and you exhale with relief. You walk further into the hammam, noticing the rhythm of the space. Cool rooms for adjusting, warm rooms for relaxing, and hot rooms for intense sweating. The progression isn't rushed. You move at your own pace, letting your body acclimate. You lie down on a heated marble slab, feel the heat sink into your back, and for a moment, all you hear is the drip of water and the soft shuffle of bare feet. It's hard not to compare. While Europeans were tossing chamber pots into streets, Islamic cities were building hammams that became central to urban life. They were places of health, cleanliness, and community, spaces where the body and soul both got a tune-up. And the hammam tradition didn't vanish. It spread, influencing Ottoman baths, Turkish steam rooms, and even modern spas. You let the warmth lull you, feeling your muscles soften, your breath slow. Someone pours a bucket of warm water over you, and you sink further into drowsy peace. The echoing chamber, the soft light, the perfume, and the low murmur of voices. It's like a lullaby made of stone and steam. And as you sit there, basking in centuries-old rituals, you realize sometimes history isn't boring at all. Sometimes it's a warm room, a splash of rose water, and the quiet reassurance that humans have always craved: comfort, community, and the simple bliss of feeling clean. You leave the hammam behind, steam still clinging to your skin, and step into yet another world of bathing traditions. This time your journey takes you eastward, across deserts, mountains, and oceans, into the lands of Asia, where water, ritual, and community intertwine in ways both familiar and strange. First stop, Japan. You find yourself walking along a quiet wooden path, lined with bamboo and lanterns flickering in the dusk. The air smells faintly of pine and fresh earth. Ahead, a wooden building waits, steam curling from its roof. This is the onsen, the Japanese hot spring bath. You slide open the wooden door and step into a room, where warm water fills a stone pool. The rule here is simple: Wash thoroughly before you enter. Cleanliness is everything. You sit on a tiny wooden stool, ladle warm water over yourself, scrub gently with soap, rinse, and only then are you ready. When you finally slip into the steaming spring, the water envelopes you in a warmth so deep it feels like you're dissolving. Your muscles unclench, your eyelids grow heavy, and you understand instantly why bathing in Japan is not just about hygiene, it's about healing. Families bathe together, neighbors gather, and conversations drift lazily over the rising mist. And there's a quirky little detail. People sometimes place folded towels on their heads while soaking, as if balancing a tiny hat. Practical too. It keeps your towel warm and stops it from slipping into the water. You sit back, the mountains glowing in twilight outside, and think, not bad, right? Far from boring. From Japan, you drift westward, landing in the bustling cities of ancient China. Here, bathing takes on a different form. One, infused with herbal remedies and the wisdom of traditional medicine. You walk into a courtyard where bronze basins sit over glowing embers. Steam rises as attendants toss in bundles of herbs, mugwort, chrysanthemum, ginseng. The air fills with earthy medicinal scents. You step closer, inhale, and feel the sharp sting of eucalyptus clearing your sinuses. Bathing here is less about luxury and more about balance, restoring harmony between body and spirit. You dip into a wooden tub infused with herbs, the water tingling faintly against your skin. It's said to drive out sickness, to chase away evil humors. And as you soak, someone pours tea into your hands. Not for bathing, but for drinking, because inner cleansing is as important as outer. Scholars still argue whether bathing was common across all of ancient China or mostly reserved for elites. Records mention emperors with entire bath complexes, while peasants may have settled for rivers or simple basins. Yet the herbal traditions remain strong, linking water, plants, and wellness in a way that feels both practical and almost magical. And then, further south, you find yourself along the banks of the Ganges in India. Here, bathing is less about luxury or even hygiene. It is an act of devotion. You watch as people step into the flowing river, cupping the sacred water in their hands before pouring it back over their heads. The current is cool, carrying the murmur of prayers and the calls of temple bells. Ritual bathing is central to Hindu practice, believed to purify the soul and wash away sins. It's not about perfumed oils or heated stones. It's about connection. You wade into the river, the water swirling around your legs, and suddenly the noise of the world fades. There's only the river, the chant of voices, and the sense that you are part of something eternal. Odd details make their way in here too. In some traditions, ashes of the dead are cast into the river, mingling with the waters that cleanse the living. It's both unsettling and profound. The river is both a grave and a source of renewal. You can't help but shiver, but you also feel strangely calm. Across Asia, one theme stands out. Bathing is never just about being clean. It's about healing, harmony, faith, and community. Whether you're sitting in a Japanese onsen with a towel perched on your head, sipping tea in a Chinese herbal bath, or stepping into the sacred waters of the Ganges, the act carries a weight far beyond scrubbing off the day's dust. And here's a quirky scholarly debate to lull you further. Some historians claim medieval Europeans thought bathing was dangerous, weakening the body or opening pores to disease, while in Asia, baths were seen as vital to health. Two completely different philosophies coexisting in the same era. You sink deeper into your imaginary bath, steam curling around you, and smile at the absurdity. The warmth soaks into your bones, the herbs tingle against your skin, and the river's current carries your thoughts away. You've traveled across half the world in a single evening of water, rituals, and whispers of history. And yet, your journey isn't done. There are still public smells to endure, chamber pots to dodge, and debates to explore. But for now, you linger in the mist, half asleep, half dreaming, letting Asia's ancient waters wash you clean. You leave the serene baths of Asia behind, but don't get too comfortable. The next stop is less tranquil. You wander into the heart of an ancient or medieval city, where the first thing that greets you isn't the sight of bustling markets or the sound of vendors, it's the smell. A smell so powerful, so unavoidable that it seems to seep into your very clothes. Welcome to the public olfactory nightmare of history. Imagine narrow streets packed with wooden houses leaning in toward each other, open windows, crooked shutters, and beneath them, buckets and chamber pots waiting to be emptied. You hear the clatter of a pot tipping over, followed by the unmistakable splash onto cobblestones below. Yes, waste disposal wasn't just a problem, it was part of daily life. In some cities, tossing the contents out the window was accompanied by a shouted warning. Something like "Garde l'eau" in French, literally, watch out for the water. Though let's be clear, it wasn't water. You duck instinctively, imagining what it must have been like to walk these streets during rush hour. The stench mixes with other delightful city smells, animal droppings. From horses and donkeys, rotting vegetables left in alleyways, fish guts from the market stalls. The air is a soup of scents that no candle or incense can fully cover. You breathe in, try not to gag, and realize that for city dwellers, this was simply background noise for the nose. And yet it wasn't entirely lawless. Many cities had regulations: no waste piles near churches, fines for dumping into certain streets, even designated gong farmers in medieval England, who were paid to scoop waste from cesspits. But let's be honest, the smell was still there. These nightmen, as they were sometimes called, carried buckets of filth through the dark hours, carting it out to the edges of town. Imagine that job interview. So, you'll be up to your knees in muck, but hey, steady pay. Here's a quirky detail. In some places, human waste wasn't just discarded, it was recycled. Farmers collected it for fertilizer. Yes, that apple in the orchard might have been nourished by the very contents of last night's chamber pot. You chew on that thought and instantly regret it. Scholars still argue how unbearable these cities really were. Were people simply used to the smell, noses dulled by constant exposure? Or did citizens complain endlessly, dreaming of cleaner streets? Records suggest both. Complaints about foul air appear in city documents, while some residents treated the smell as just another part of urban life, like pigeons today. And disease lurked in the air too. The theory of miasma, that bad smells, caused illness, dominated medical thought for centuries. People burned herbs, carried pomanders filled with spices, or clutched flowers to their noses in an attempt to block out the poisonous air. Did it work? Not really. But it offered a little comfort as you waded through the muck. Walking down these imaginary streets, you dodge puddles of suspicious liquid, cover your nose with your sleeve, and step carefully between piles that squelch underfoot. The noise of the marketplace continues above the stench, hawkers shouting, wheels rattling, children playing, but the smell is the invisible soundtrack you can't escape. At night, the odors don't vanish. Instead, they seem to grow stronger, pressing against the closed shutters of houses. You imagine lying in bed, candles flickering, with the scent of the gutter drifting in through the cracks. Sleep wasn't always peaceful. It was often a battle between exhaustion and the smell creeping up from below. And yet these cities thrived. People fell in love, conducted business, raised families, all while the air carried reminders of waste and decay. The smells didn't stop life. They simply became part of it. You step out of the cramped alleyway into a wider square. The air clears a little, though not entirely. A fountain splashes in the center, meant to provide clean water, though children are already washing their hands in it. You breathe deeply, grateful for the faint freshness, and marvel that entire civilizations endured, grew, and flourished amid a backdrop that modern noses would find unbearable. It's strange comfort, really. If they could survive this stench day after day, you can probably handle the faint squeak of your neighbor's fan, or the sound of traffic outside your window tonight. You leave behind the stinking streets of medieval cities and step into a quieter lane of history, one filled not so much with smells, but with stories. Because humans, being the imaginative creatures they are, didn't just use bathrooms or baths. They surrounded them with customs, superstitions, and quirky little rules that might make you raise an eyebrow or stifle a laugh. Take, for example, the Roman sponge on a stick, the tersorium. We already talked about its practical use in shared latrines. But did you know it had its own etiquette? You didn't just grab it willy-nilly. People were expected to rinse it carefully in a bucket of salt water or vinegar after use. Failure to do so was considered not just gross, but socially unacceptable. Imagine an entire community depending on your thoroughness. Talk about peer pressure in the bathroom. And then there's the mythological side. In ancient Rome, bathroom spaces were thought to be haunted by spirits known as lemures. Some Romans muttered protective words before relieving themselves, worried that mischievous ghosts might strike them at their most vulnerable moment. It's the kind of superstition that makes you look twice at the dark corner of your own bathroom at 3 a.m. In medieval Europe, odd etiquette extended to chamber pots. Some households required guests to carry their own. Others had specific pot etiquette. If you borrowed one, you'd better clean it before returning it. Fail, and you risked your reputation. You picture a grumpy host saying, Next time, bring your own bucket. And suddenly it all feels a little too relatable. Superstitions ran wild too. In parts of Europe, people believed witches could curse you by stealing your waste. Yes, that chamber pot under your bed wasn't just smelly. It was a potential magical weapon. Burn it, bury it, or guard it. Because once a witch had hold of it, your luck or your health might vanish. Here's an odd one. In some places, it was considered unlucky to whistle in a privy. Why? Scholars still argue, but some suggest it was thought to summon evil spirits. Others believe it was simply about maintaining silence because, well, privacy. Whatever the case, imagine sitting down in a garderobe and reminding yourself sternly, no tunes allowed. In Islamic hammams, as you remember, people worried about jinn lurking in the corners. In Japan, bathhouses sometimes carried warnings about spirits that might slip into the water. Even in Victorian England, new flushing toilets sparked superstitions. Early adopters sometimes feared that the suction could pull a person down the pipes. Silly? Yes. But given the noises those old pipes made, you can understand the paranoia. Another quirky custom, in many cultures, there were strict rules about which hand you used for what. The left hand, especially in parts of Asia and the Middle East, was considered the dirty hand, reserved for washing after relieving yourself. The right hand was for eating, greeting, and sacred gestures. Mixing them up. Social disaster. You suddenly realize how much muscle memory goes into daily life, and how quickly one wrong move could brand you impolite. And of course, bathroom humor is timeless. Graffiti from Roman latrines has been found with jokes and insults, scratched into the walls. Imagine someone squatting in a stone seat, carving Marcus Stinks into the wall beside them. Crude? Absolutely. But human? Without a doubt. There's also the odd idea of bathrooms as storage. Remember the garderobes in castles where clothes were hung to deter moths? That wasn't unique. In some households, chamber pots doubled as emergency containers for food scraps, though hopefully not at the same time. Efficiency and horror balanced on a thin edge. As you drift through these customs and myths, you realize how much meaning people attach to something so universal. Bathrooms weren't just physical necessities. They were liminal spaces, somewhere between public and private, sacred and profane, which makes sense. After all, it's one of the few things every human has to do every single day. And if history teaches anything, it's that we've always surrounded even the most mundane acts with stories, fears, and rules. You picture yourself sitting in a dim medieval privy, whispering a charm under your breath, carefully not whistling, and making sure your cloak is safe from moths overhead. You almost laugh, but then again, with all the spirits, witches, and jinn people swore lived nearby, maybe you wouldn't dare. You step out of the shadowy world of superstitions and odd rules, and into the brighter light of arguments, because historians, it turns out, love to fight over the details of cleanliness. One of the biggest debates, whether medieval people really bathed as little as we think. The stereotype goes like this. Europe fell into darkness after the Romans, and everyone lived filthy lives, covered in grime, stinking to high heaven. But scholars still argue whether that picture is fair, or if we've oversimplified things. You picture a medieval peasant trudging along a muddy road. Was he really caked in dirt year-round? Some evidence suggests not. Records mention rivers being used for washing clothes and bodies. Town councils regulated bathhouses, sometimes even providing communal spaces for men and women to bathe, though usually at separate times. In Paris, for instance, public baths existed well into the Middle Ages, bustling with chatter and steam. And then there's the church. You've probably heard that religious leaders discouraged bathing, fearing it encouraged vanity or even sin. True in some cases, but not universally. Some monastic rules required bathing at least a few times a year, especially on major feast days. Not exactly daily showers, but still far from never. Here's a quirky twist. Many medieval people believed hot water was dangerous. Bathing in warmth might open the pores, making you vulnerable to disease. Cold water, though, that was thought to toughen the body. So while they might avoid long, hot soaks, splashing themselves in rivers or streams could still be part of daily life. You wince at the thought of plunging into icy water at dawn. But maybe it kept them sharper than we give them credit for. Another wrinkle in the debate, clothing. Some historians argue that frequent changing of linen was considered just as cleansing as washing the skin. White linen undergarments, washed often, were thought to draw out dirt and sweat. So yes, you might skip the bath but still feel fresh in a crisp new shirt. It's like history's version of Fabrizi. Questionable, but practical. And yet contradictions abound. Records show noble ladies having elaborate bath rituals, complete with perfumed oils, rose petals, and attendants pouring water into wooden tubs. At the same time, a farmer in the countryside might have gone weeks without a proper wash, relying instead on a quick splash at the village well. So which was it? Clean or filthy? The answer seems to be both, depending on who you were, where you lived, and what you could afford. Some archaeologists point to lice combs, soaps made from ash and animal fat, and even early tooth cleaning tools as evidence that people cared about hygiene more than we assume. Others counter that skeletons often show signs of parasites, meaning whatever methods they used weren't terribly effective. You lean against a wooden bathhouse door in your imagination, listening to muffled voices inside. Are they enjoying a luxurious soak, or are they avoiding it entirely? Worried about sickness? Scholars still argue. Maybe it's a bit of both. And the funny thing is, later centuries looked back at the Middle Ages and exaggerated the filth, partly to make themselves look better. Renaissance writers painted their predecessors as smelly barbarians, while Victorians, ironically living in some of the dirtiest, cities loved the idea of cleaning up history. So the reputation of medieval stink may be as much about propaganda as it is about reality. You picture yourself stepping into a medieval street again. The smells are still there. The chamber pots still fly from the windows. But you also notice a woman scrubbing clothes at a fountain, a child splashing in a stream, a merchant carrying a pouch of scented herbs. It's not spotless, but it's not hopelessly filthy either. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the messy middle, and maybe, just maybe, people weren't as oblivious to hygiene as we like to imagine. They had their own systems, beliefs, and compromises. Different from ours, yes. Less effective, definitely. But still an attempt at feeling, if not clean, at least human. The bathhouse and step into a street, where the contrast between rich and poor hits. You like the smell of tanner's vats. If there was one thing medieval cities loved to exaggerate, it was difference, and nowhere was it clearer than in hygiene. At one end, you see a wealthy merchant's wife preparing for a bath. Her servants carry buckets of warm water into a wooden tub lined with cloth to make it more comfortable. She has oils infused with rosemary and lavender, petals ready to scatter across the surface, and even a small mirror to check her hair afterward. Perfume sachets hang on the wall, not just to sweeten the air but also to ward off disease. This is bathing as theater, a performance of luxury as much as cleanliness. At the other end of the same city, a farmer who's brought goods into town rinses. His hands in a trough used to water horses. His bath might be nothing more than splashing a little water on his face before trudging to the market square. When he gets home, maybe he dunks himself in a muddy river, the same one where the village laundress beats clothes with wooden paddles. Hygiene here isn't about fragrance or ritual. It's about survival and convenience. And here's where the odd detail sneaks in. Sometimes these extremes overlapped. Bathhouses in larger cities weren't always exclusive to the rich. For a small fee, common folk could step into steam and warm water, sharing space with artisans, clerks, even apprentices. Imagine the mix of accents, smells, and gossip swirling through that misty room. It wasn't just about washing. It was a kind of social media feed, updated by candlelight. Still, the elite knew how to set themselves apart. Nobles could afford fine soaps imported from the Islamic world, made with olive oil and herbs, far superior to the rough lye soaps of the countryside. Their linens were bleached whiter, their perfumes costlier, their rituals slower. Cleanliness became a status symbol. The richer you were, the sweeter you smelled. Scholars still argue whether this obsession with fragrance was practical or mostly symbolic. Was it about fighting disease, masking odor, or simply flaunting wealth? The truth is probably a blend. A nobleman reeking of rosewater wasn't just pleasant company. He was broadcasting that he had the means to waste money on something ephemeral. Meanwhile, the poor leaned on what they had. Charcoal rubbed on teeth, vinegar rinses for hair, rough soaps made from leftover animal fat. They didn't skip hygiene entirely, they just did it differently. Cruder, harsher, but no less determined. And yet, there was one point of overlap. Both rich and poor loved a good sweat bath. In colder regions like Scandinavia, steam huts became the great equalizers. Peasants and chiefs alike sat shoulder to shoulder, sweating out grime and chatting in the haze. Some historians even suggest these traditions inspired later bathhouse cultures across Europe. You walk down the city street and the split feels surreal. On one side, delicate glass flasks of imported perfume catch the light in a wealthy shop. On the other, a boy is dunking his entire head into a public fountain. shaking water everywhere like a drenched puppy. Both are chasing the same goal: to feel just a little cleaner in a world that seemed determined to make everyone dirty. It's the contrasts that make medieval cities so oddly human. The sweet and the sour, the perfumed bath and the muddy river, the luxury and the necessity, all woven together into the strange fabric of daily life. And when you lean back and close your eyes, you can almost smell it. A mix of rosewater, wood smoke, sweat, and soap ash. The medieval version of cologne. Not perfect, not consistent, but unmistakably theirs. You wander further through the streets, and the city begins to buzz with voices that aren't just bargaining over bread or cloth. Instead, you catch the sing-song cries of vendors hawking the tools of cleanliness. In a world without supermarkets, hygiene had its own supply chain, and it was alive, noisy, and sometimes downright quirky. At one corner, a soap seller arranges little cakes of lye soap on a worn wooden board. They're rough, grayish, sometimes flecked with herbs. Nothing like the neat bars you know today. These were handmade, boiled from leftover animal fat mixed with wood ash. Not glamorous, but they worked. The seller waves one under your nose, assuring you it will purge filth and foul smells from your skin. You can't help but smirk. It smells faintly of bacon and smoke. A few stalls down, an herb peddler has baskets overflowing with dried lavender, rosemary, mint, and thyme. You watch as a woman buys a bundle of rosemary sprigs, not for cooking but to hang inside her home. People believed the sharp scent could cleanse the air, protect against disease, and keep evil spirits at bay. And to be fair, it did cover up the stench of chamber pots. You notice how he sprinkles a little dried mint into a jug of water to make a crude mouth. Rinse an ancient cousin to mouthwash. Then come the water carriers, trudging down the street with yokes across, their shoulders and heavy, buckets bouncing at their sides. For those without private wells, this was the lifeline of hygiene. Want to wash your hands? Want to fill your bath? You'd better know a water carrier. They shouted their prices in the square, charging more if the walk was uphill. Imagine paying a premium just so someone would lug a bucket up to your flat. It was the medieval version of delivery charges. Here's the odd detail. Some vendors sold urine as well. Yes, really. Collected from chamber pots and tanneries, urine was prized for its ammonia, used in laundry to whiten cloth. Housewives, laundresses, and even cloth merchants might buy a jug or two. You can't help but laugh. It's the one street corner where you don't want to linger too long. Meanwhile, scholars still argue about just how organized these street trades were. Were soap makers part of formal guilds in every city? Or were they just freelancers until later centuries? The debate continues. And as you pass through this bustling marketplace of cleanliness, you realize it didn't really matter to the customers. What mattered was having something, anything, that made life feel fresher. In a way, these vendors were the unsung heroes of medieval hygiene. Without them, even the wealthy couldn't keep up their fragrant baths and perfumed linens. And without them, the poor would have had nothing beyond cold water and wishful thinking. They carried, mixed, boiled, bundled, and sold their way into every household, every street, every wash basin.